You say Hans von Spakovsky. Well, yes, I do say Hans von Spakovsky, the senior legal analyst at the Heritage Foundation, manager of election reform, the election reform initiative at Heritage Action. Welcome back, Hans.
Hi, Crane. How you doing?
I'm good. You also wrote a book called Who's Counting? Pretty important stuff.
Well, yeah, and as you know, I got a new one coming out on June 10th.
I remember you speaking to that. Now, do we have a title for the new one? Pardon my ignorance.
It's called Obama's Enforcer, Eric Holder's Justice Department. So that gives you a pretty good idea what it's about.
Wow. There's a lot there, and I look forward to speaking with you and reading that and, quite frankly, learning more about what has happened to the justice system in the United States, the federal justice system in the United States. You've made allusions to a banana republic, and I want to get to that in a second. The first thing I want to do is I want to go to Elijah Cummings speaking to Representative Cummings speaking to the issue of Lois Lerner and the IRS scandal and her pleading the fifth, taking the fifth, and the contempt citation from Congress. Roll it.
You're talking to Jeremy. Let me say this. Again, this is the first time since the 1950s and 60s that a committee has stripped somebody of their Fifth Amendment right and then at the same time went on to a criminal contempt citation. And this is unprecedented except in the McCarthy era. And even in that era, it failed. And so, I'm wondering where we're going here, Joe. It seems as if there has been an effort to, again, my argument was not that I don't want to hear what Ms. Lerner had to say. I really do want to hear it. But you know what? There's something that is more significant than that, and that is upholding the constitutional rights of every single American.
Would you disagree with Representative Cummings' interpretation of events with Lois Lerner and being held in contempt?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. His reference to the McCarthy era and McCarthy targeting individuals that he thought were members of the Communist Party, well, that's very similar to what Lois Lerner did in targeting Tea Party and other organizations that she considered to be opposing the policies of her president. So, yeah, he can make that reference, but he's got it a little mixed up.
Let's stay with this, and then I want to jump to Walker, your piece last week, because that also goes to that issue, if I'm not mistaken. I want to go to your latest piece, and we'll get to Rand Paul as well. I know we've got a lot to get to. Your paper on the new IRS regulations. Now, some people may be sitting there going, are you referring back to what you just talked about with Lois Lerner and targeting of conservative groups and that process and understanding and holding people to account for targeting people in a McCarthy-like fashion to silence them, to make it harder for them to speak politically? And you're saying, no, this is in addition to, right?
That's exactly right. The kind of targeting criteria that Lois Lerner used to figure out which organizations to go after that were applying for tax-exempt status, well, now the IRS has proposed changes to the regulations that actually govern those very same advocacy organizations. They are just atrociously bad regulations, and they're clearly intended to squelch the political speech of advocacy organizations like the Tea Party. And those regulations have been proposed by the IRS. Lots of people have written in protesting them. Whether the IRS will go forward with them, I don't know, but I can tell you it's another dangerous development.
Now, does Congress have a say in what the IRS does here in the sense of enforcing these new regulations?
Well, yeah, they could. Actually, there was an attempt a couple of months ago by Congress on the House side to include in I think a funding bill going through a 1 or 2 year delay in these regulations being implemented, and to no one's great surprise, that got stopped by Harry Reid on the Senate side.
I heard one of the persecuted when it comes to the Tea Party groups that were targeted originally by the IRS over the 2010 to today period of understanding. And her point in speaking up was, I'm worried about not only today, but what happens when Republicans get in. She wasn't being partisan. She was pointing out that this is just too much power. Would you agree?
Oh, I certainly do agree. And, you know, in the midst of all of this, all of these scandals at the IRS, I mean, you've got to laugh about the fact that this week it came out that at the same time, you know, the IRS has been complaining. They don't have enough money for staff. They spent $100 million on new furniture, refurbishing their offices.
Wow. That just depresses me.
It should.
I mean, I sit there, Catherine and I talk about this. I go, one day we'll get some new furniture, even a piece of new furniture. We talk about it. It's a very big deal. And I always think about that when government does something, how we look at spending as American families. And I know you relate to this, and how government looks at them. The difference is, I guess, we don't have a printing press, and we have limits on what we can borrow from the next generation, so to speak.
Yeah, unfortunately, the government doesn't, at least not the way it's been run in Washington now for many years, and that's just as true of the IRS.
It's very frustrating. The other part to that is the political speech and targeting people, legalizing through lawfare. And I've heard that in a number of different ways, but when it comes to political speech, in Wisconsin, a federal judge ruled ostensibly in favor of the John Doe investigations that were taking place on Governor Walker with two particular groups. I believe one was the Club for Growth, and he said, no, this was an overreach. As soon as that happened, Hans, the good news didn't last long, did it?
Well, it went up to an appeals court, but then it went back down to the federal judge, and in fact, he ordered local prosecutors who were led by a Democratic prosecutor to stop their investigation of upwards of 30 conservative organizations in Wisconsin. In fact, the judge said that basically every right and center-right organization in Wisconsin had been targeted since 2010 by these local prosecutors.
So we're talking 30 groups, not two groups.
Yeah, Wisconsin
30
Club
groups.
for Growth was just the reason we know about them is they basically violated the secrecy order that had been imposed on them by the prosecutor, saying they couldn't say anything about this investigation, and they went to federal court to try to get it stopped, claiming that their civil rights had been violated.
And this goes now. What happens, Hans, with it? What the judge has done has stopped it. Then, and we're in a good place. Went back to the appeals. Went back to the judge's order. So, is it finished, or is there more to come?
Well, no. Now we're going to have a case where Wisconsin Club for Growth is going to be able to try to get damages against these prosecutors, because something else very significant happened. You know, prosecutors are normally immune to any kind of suits. That's a standard rule. The judge refused to give the prosecutors immunity because he said they didn't have probable cause for the investigation.
And will the investigators, are we talking about so we're talking about monetary damages there?
Oh, yeah, they're seeking monetary damages because, for example, Club for Growth said that their donors were scared off by this investigation and all their records being seized, and that they estimated they lost $2 million in fundraising that they could have had, except for this unwarranted investigation.
Will they recoup legal fees in addition to that?
Yeah, they should be able to get legal fees too. But look, something that's important to see, the tactics that were used in this case were shocking. The police showed up with a search warrant in the middle of the night at the homes of Club for Growth employees and their president, shined spotlights on the house, seized all of their telephones, computers, records, and restrained them and wouldn't allow them to contact their lawyers. That's the kind of thing you do when you're targeting a criminal drug cartel, not people engaging in political speech.
Hans, these tactics, unfortunately, we see as part of a greater trend. I know that's why you're writing a book, and we appreciate you taking the time out from doing all that, and as well as the promotion and everything, I'm sure. But here's the other question: with these people who were investigating, would they be subject to abuse regulation or charges in a sense of abuse of power in their jobs? Would we see a consequence of someone losing their job for overstepping in this manner?
Well, that's tough to do with prosecutors. I would hope that a personal judgment against them, might actually help drive them out of their jobs, because these prosecutors, like I said, they were unapologetic about what they were doing. And I just find it shocking that these kind of thuggish tactics were being used. And by the way, most of the local newspapers didn't see a problem with it because, these were conservative organizations. But this is part of this whole trend, as you said, of trying to criminalize political differences. And
once again, and I believe it was in that article, and you have to pardon me, Hans, you write a lot. It's great. It's wonderful. I read them, and then I occasionally don't have enough protein to get the melon stimulated to remember. But you referenced the turning into a banana republic. First off, explain that for everyone who's maybe not familiar expressly with the term, and how close are we? Are we as close as we've been in certainly the last 50 years to becoming one?
Oh, I think so. But by banana republic, that was a term that was used for all these Central and South American countries that were run by semi-dictators who used the power of the government against their political opponents. And the kind of tactics that were being used in Wisconsin by these local district attorneys, I think, are very reminiscent of those kind of banana republic tactics. Not what we expect in what is supposed to be the world's foremost democracy.
When do we get this back? How do we? And I don't want to jump to Rand Paul, but how do we get back a system that has been so corrupted, from the race-neutral policy being abandoned to what you have just talked about? Is there, and what does history tell us about getting the rule of law back? Because I get the idea once the foundation's taken out, it's very tough to do.
Yeah, it's very tough to put the genie back in the bottle once it's popped out. And let's take Wisconsin for example. This was all done in Wisconsin under this horrible law they call the John Doe law, which allows these kind of secret investigations of political activities. And frankly, the number one task of the Wisconsin legislature when they come back is to get rid of this law and not allow this to happen. And I can tell you, if the legislators there, particularly the Republican legislators, fail to do that, they will be failing in their duty that they have in this particular area.
And that's up to, part of that is the Fourth Estate really jumping in and exposing it. And as you said, what we've seen from the press has been ideologically, I line up, so there's a willful blindness, to put it mildly, and to take it from the term of what has been talked about with Andrew C. McCarthy with the willful blindness toward Islamism. Right. It's a willful blindness when it comes to the corruption of those that ideologically line up with those that are reporting on, or ostensibly going to be our guy or our gal who's keeping the powerful in check.
Unfortunately, very true, Craig.
Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, criticized, in a way, voter ID laws and saying we were too, those of us concerned with them, and I think he was speaking to the party, Republican Party, not necessarily one and the same thing, not about R's or D's, not accountability. My point is, when I talk about conservatives, the idea is people advancing these maybe a little too concerned or doing some harm to that. I may be misquoting him, but I understand he's taken that back, or what's the status? What happened here, Hans?
Well, he clearly is buying into the propaganda of opponents. I mean, he basically said that Republicans are too obsessed with voter ID and that it's insulting people. Well, you know, the only people that are obsessed with voter ID are, frankly, leaders of the Democratic Party and their allies in the civil rights community and those who oppose this kind of election integrity efforts. The majority of Americans, including black Americans, Hispanic Americans, white Americans, they all think voter ID is a common sense reform and something that is needed. And he's just so way off base on this that it's very clear he really doesn't know what he's talking about, particularly being in Kentucky. Because, Crane, I can tell you, for example, Kentucky, unfortunately, has this long tradition of corruption in their elections, particularly of vote buying. There have been many, many cases prosecuted in Kentucky of vote buying, which shows that, unfortunately, there are people there who are willing to cheat to win elections.
I think within an hour, and less than that, obviously, if this were ever debated in front of the American people in the form of a presidential election or something along those lines, and you had somewhat any semblance of impartiality with a moderator, people would sit there and go, what are you talking about? In the sense that somehow this is just not common sense. That right. this somehow is a racist idea to put forth laws that hold people to account. And obviously you've exposed that in Who's Counting with the reality of it. Does it frustrate you? In closing question here, Hans, are you ever frustrated with the amount of baloney, or as my daughter would like to say, bunny stew you have to deal with when it comes to just getting common sense, simple common sense initiatives as well as laws understood and even supported?
Yeah, I do get awfully tired of it. But, you know, it's actually interesting because there's a big difference between the rest of the country and Washington. You get a lot more of that kind of baloney in Washington, D.C., and New York to some extent because all the media elites are up there. You don't get as much of it in other parts of the country, fortunately.
Can't wait for your book. Great work. Going to post it. Thank you for taking the time tonight, Hans. It's really good to be with you, my friend.
Great. Good. See you later, Crane.
Take
Bye-bye.
care, buddy. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Now, you want to see something that would make you feel good? I want to play the Smirkonish thing about talk radio, but I feel like I have to play one of the Jesse Waters clips, and we'll go back. And why don't we go with 3, 4, and 5? 3, 4, and 5. This is from Factor last night, and when something is this good, I gotta play it. Jesse Waters confronting Steve Israel, who made a comment about immigration, Republicans, and racism. Roll it.
You said that the Republican base was animated by racism. Can you explain that?
Well, you know, you are picking up on something that was out of context and happened 3 weeks ago, so I question why you would even ask that 3 weeks after.
Well, because we've invited you on the show a number of times and you keep declining.
We need to get away from ascribing motives and just pass a comprehensive immigration bill. Who cares what people think? We need to engage in action, pass a comprehensive immigration bill. That would be one of the most important things we can do.
What's your evidence that Republicans are racist?
I never said that. And
you said the Republican base was animated by racism. Yes, you did. We have it on tape.
To a significant extent, the Republican base does have elements that are animated by racism. I'm sorry, but I have to go vote.
Congressman, I pay your salary. Answer the question. You're a public official.
Sir, I appreciate that, but you're holding me up for a vote. If I miss this vote, it's going to be because you are standing in the way of the other.
You don't want to apologize?
I've said what I'm going to say. You are literally stopping me from voting, and that's what my constituents pay me to do.
I pay you to do that. Thank you very much.
Jesse Waters also took on Benny Thompson for his comments about GOP's racism and Clarence Thomas being a, quote, Uncle Tom. Roll it.
You said that Clarence Thomas was an Uncle Tom. Pretty disrespectful.
And there's Uncle Tom, Clarence Thomas.
Oh, y'all, brother. Oh, brother. You said that, I did.
Well, in the course of the conversation, I've looked at a lot of his decisions. People I represent had a real problem with his lack of sensitivity.
But you don't believe he's an Uncle Tom, do you? That's pretty disparaging, isn't it?
All I'm saying is I disagree with his opinions as it relates to people of color.
You don't think all black Republicans are Uncle Toms, do you?
I didn't know the Supreme Court Justice was a Republican.
Well, you said that a lot of his initiatives and policies that he support are Republican policies. Can't you be black and be Republican?
Well, I didn't say he was a Republican. I said I disagreed with his opinions.
Now, I wonder if the likes of Harry Reid and others were held to the standard that Jesse Waters just held those representatives to, a standard of making such a outrageous allegation and having to back it up, and you're not in the tunnel of support at MSNBC and and smearing others with these horrible allegations. Now, there's more to the story, obviously. Jesse Waters went on to ask him about minimum wage about unemployment and black teen unemployment as well. We can get to that another time. I just wanted you to know that one of the main problems is exposing this and holding people to account for what they say. And when you do that, all of a sudden, maybe these false narratives wouldn't be constructed, because by just pointing out the absurdity of it or how it's not true also, and how it's not, you really can't construct much of anything. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart. Always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. AFR Talk.